Terminator 2 Judgment Day from 1991, directed by the one and only Jim Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong. Quick logline: a cyborg identical to one who failed to kill Sarah Connor must now protect her 10-year-old son John from an even more advanced and powerful cyborg. As if anybody has not seen this movie.
Right.
Oh well. Um, but this movie is, to me, that childhood movie magic memory of watching with a bunch of friends. And I'll set the scene. So I think I mentioned on the podcast, but my dad was in the army, so we moved around quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And often, the army in India, and I guess most places, has a pretty big sort of party culture, not sort of like party in the sense like people getting wasted or what have you, but more like social gatherings and such. So
Got
that sort of thing. So we would get invited to people's homes, and at this point, I don't know if you were watching at my place, like, English VHS tapes and such, like new movies that came out. We were watching a lot of classics like Disney movies and things. So me and my sister, we were both had some friend's place, my parents' friend's place, and while the adults were hanging out outside, we were all in the bedroom, the kids' bedroom, watching on a little TV in their bedroom a VHS tape of this movie. And I don't think I'd even seen the first one. And we just couldn't believe what we were watching. It was just one of those transcendent experiences, and kind of what defined Hollywood to me, what defined movie magic to me. So yeah, this is kind of that unbeatable memory of just watching a movie in a little bedroom on a tiny, horrible TV and being totally transfixed by the movie, but also just the shared experience as, little kids watching something and just being totally blown out of their minds. What is your relationship and memory of watching this movie the first time?
Yeah. So just the question, like, how old do you think you were in that time?
I want to say like 8-9 years old or something like that.
Yeah. So like right when it sort of had first come out then.
Right.
Yeah. For me, it's very similar with this film too. Like I was around that age, like 9, maybe 10. So I did not see this in the theater. And I do think the thing that makes this movie so interesting to me is it's an R-rated movie for kids, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it's rated R, but this is a movie for kids. But it was very similar to your experience of this was a consistent sleepover movie. From that age all the way up through high school. And if I'm over at some friend's house, especially like, in grade school for sleepovers, you'd have T2 would be right in there on the VHS tape in the rotation. So there's a lot of watching it with groups of my friends. Also, my sisters and I both loved this movie growing up too. So there's a lot of memories I have too of watching this again on television and then later on DVD or a VHS and then DVD of watching this movie just with my sisters. It's just an endlessly entertaining film that I just appreciate it more and more the older I get in terms of what it was able to pull off. I think it's Jim Cameron's my favorite movie of his and arguably potentially his best movie too. It's just so note perfect all around. But it is so interesting that this is a hard R, very violent. There's some language and stuff in that too. But I think that putting the main character of John Connor, at least, as like an age of like 12, 13, and he is very annoying. And
a
bratty.
Bad actor.
I don't know. I think Furlong is great in what he's trying to do here.
Casting not the best children in his movies.
I'll push back, and I thought Newt was good in Aliens. But anyway, what's interesting about this is, as a 8 and 10-year-old, you look up to like 13-year-olds, even when they were kind of lame and annoying, like John Connor kind of is, you still think that they're cool, and it's a way for you as a kid to feel like you're part of the movie because there's a little kid basically in the movie as the main character getting dragged around by Arnold and in the action. I mean, you're never really feeling like he's in danger per se. It's not like, oh no, like if I was there,
close
I'd be
enough,
killed.
But never too much.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a brilliantly I don't know if that was the initial conceit of we're going to make like a kid version of a movie of the Terminator for kids. Because the first Terminator, which much like you, I had not seen when I saw this one, is much more serious, darker, great film too. Like an insanely good film. But this movie has a more sense of fun and energy to it that I think Arnold also brings that as well as the good guy, as opposed to playing the bad guy. That, Arnold is just kids love Arnold. We could talk endlessly about Arnold, and I will as a teaser for something we'll announce at the end of this episode. But, he was always one of my favorite actors growing up. I was obsessed with him, and this was a lot of the reason why, like him in this movie in particular. It's just so great. But it's just funny, yeah. Both of us were like 8 or 9
Yeah.
watching an R-rated action movie, like basically at like sleepovers and like group gatherings. Hey, that's Jim Cameron for you, I guess.
I know, pretty great. Yeah, I agree with both of those points that you made, but I think my memory of this movie having a kind of impact on me and the
Mm-hmm.
friends and my sister that we watched together with was actually the T100. Those
T1000,
T1000,
T1000.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Those scenes of like the phone scene and
Oh yeah.
then, all those metal drops combining and him sort of vanishing in the floor, like it was that stuff that kind of really, like, our jaws were on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is this happening? And spoiler alert, it still holds up. Like,
It
all of
does.
that stuff works so well. Like, this is all practically mounted, and the CGI looks, whatever they did looks so incredible. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it was that movie magic feeling. But you're right. I think the kid being at the center of the film, Arnold being so endearing, and also, it has sort of the classic movie tropes, right? Of, we're going to walk with somebody who's not from this world
Right.
and see
Right.
how they learn, how they fumble. And in this case, it's the kid who's leading that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's very endearing and funny and very well done. Um, and then the propulsive action, I think, is something that, even though it's dark and violent, there's something really fun about it. Like, you sort
Mm-hmm.
of, and the bad guy is so good at what he does, like the way he runs and all of it, that he's a great match for Arnold. And I think, you're, as kids, like, you're kind of flipping your minds between whose team are you on, even though you don't recognize or understand the consequences of what
Yeah.
any of this means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, but you're just rooting for whoever is the most impressive. So that was the other thing. I think we, as kids, we were like rooting for this guy or the other guy, and we were obviously changing our allegiances as the movie went on. And I think that's pretty fun too. Then you're part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting too how, I think this is arguably one of the best sequels of all time too. And
Mhm.
what Cameron is so good at sequels, but then especially with this film, was essentially the same plot of the first movie. Like the basic nuts and bolts of it are all still there. So you have the familiarity, you sort of know what it is gonna be, but he adds in enough twists and interesting things in it that are different and new. And one of those is definitely the T1000 played by Robert Patrick, where you might think Arnold needs to go up to someone against someone who's bigger than him because he's so big. But no, like Robert Patrick is slender, he's athletic build versus like bodybuilder, but he has more of the tech. So he's
And
smaller
faster.
physically, but he has more technology. And how is Arnold, who's like the more outdated T800 model? It's like, okay, well, he's going up against someone who's looks smaller, but actually is more capable. So that's what makes it
Right.
interesting throughout the whole movie of like, wow, it actually looks like a real threat to this guy who in the first movie as Arnold in Terminator 1, he was unstoppable. Nothing could stop
Right.
him. And now there is something that can stop him, and it's this smaller guy. So it makes it fun and interesting. And there is sort of a humor that Robert Patrick puts into that character too.
Yeah.
I mean, he does some icy cold kills and things, but there's a little bit of like a charm to him sometimes. I love the scene when he's like wagging his finger at John at the end and just joking around some with the kids a little bit in the beginning, trying to find
Mhm.
John in the mall. He insanely good performance by Robert Patrick in this thing. And then
Yeah.
also Linda Hamilton, the transformation that her character goes through and the physical transformation Linda Hamilton undergoes in this movie, just looking so tough and buff and,
Kind
hardened
of
after
amazing.
all those, what she experienced in the first one. Just an incredible performance. I mean, everyone in this movie, I still like Edward Furlong. I think for what he does in this role, he actually does a really, really good job as John Connor, being the right
It's
amount of
off
annoying.
its Yeah, and if it's off its time too, right? Like, I think
Yes,
this is
yes.
how we looked at, or we wanted cool kids to be like in the movies, like the way he talks and his whole vibe and his hair and everything.
Well, again, the interesting thing about John is like, as I remember as kids, we always thought he was annoying. Like this guy sucks. Like we could be cooler than him. Why aren't we in this
Huh.
movie? And I think that helps because it's like he's almost like the version of what an adult would think a kid would think was cool at the time. But if you're a kid, you're like, oh, that he's kind of lame actually. But I think that's what helps because then you feel more invested in like, oh, I could be in this movie than if
Right.
I
We
could be
could
the
be
kid.
that
I'm
too.
better than that kid. I could be there and
Right.
Arnold could be helping me. Because we always thought he was annoying. I don't know. But again, I think the performance again that he gives is great. And And yeah, the movie just like about a lot of different things, whole allegory on fatherhood and Arnold being, the surrogate
Mhm,
father that John never had. You touched on the fish out of water stuff, which
mhm.
works so well in here, where Arnold doesn't know how to interact with the humans and John's teaching him.
Yeah.
And I also love how this movie takes because the theme of the first one was basically about like the future set. You have to deal with the fate that's coming, and the amazing shot at the end of Terminator 1 where she's driving off into a storm, because like a storm is coming. It's a future that you cannot stop, which
Mhm,
is a depressing kind of feeling.
mhm.
And then this movie is about the future is what you make it. And the
Right.
very last scene is just a road driving into, you don't know where, but you're in the car. Like it's a POV shot. So that means you get to define your own future. I think it's a more uplifting message in this film of, you know what, fate is not set. You can do
Right.
whatever you want. Sarah and John, they change the future by defeating the T-1000, and who knows what the future will hold. And I think that's a more positive message. And that's what I love about how they can flip that from the first one, which ended so negatively.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would agree. I think Jim Cameron's best movie in my mind too.
Yeah.
Probably, if not the best, in the top, action movies ever
Oh,
made.
yeah, easily.
Not just for its time, but for any time. It's sort
Hmm.
of timeless. And you're right. I think it's something about the tonality of it. Like it's fun and propulsive and winking at you, but also handling some serious things, but then is
Hmm.
mounted on these amazing effects and amazing action sequences. The pacing of the movie is
Incredible.
incredible.
Hmm.
And I think that's what his superpower is. We've talked in our past episodes about the Avatar movies and such. Though they are brilliant spectacles and technical achievements, I think what is his not strongest suit is when he gets a little too serious about larger, heavier themes, and then they have to
Hmm.
be portrayed in dialogue and human emotionality. Like that's not his thing. And I think this movie just has the right amount of that he
Hmm.
can handle and do it very deftly. And it doesn't take over. The movie knows what it is. Like this is
Right.
a fun movie.
Right.
And and that's, I think, that's where he really excels. Like that's where the Terminator movies, even True Lies,
Oh, yeah.
just
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. I
Uh-huh.
think I love this era of his. Sarah Connor, yeah, I agree. Linda Hamilton, I should say, great physical transformation. The acting on watching it this time is definitely a bit of a heat check of like, yeah, I'm going to be at 15 at all times, uh, or not all times, but like a lot of times. So there's a little bit of that I was sort of feeling this time that, okay, can we just reduce your volume just a little bit? Like that would be nice. but I mean, what am I even? No, it's really, to be honest, like this is such a great movie,
Yeah.
and
I mean, yeah, I
being,
agree. I
like I
think,
said, an intro to Hollywood movie
yeah,
making.
I could definitely see that, especially of that, like the 90s. This is really like the birth of
Yeah.
90s filmmaking. I think you can put it a lot on the shoulders of this film, especially like you mentioned the VFX. Brilliant
Hmm.
combination of cutting edge CGI, Stan Winston's practical effects just off the chain, and some very basic things like, hey, Linda Hamilton has a twin. Let's use her twin sister in this scene where it's supposed to be two of her. Okay.
Right.
The same thing with the security guard who gets killed
Right.
in the hospital. Twins. So they're using like
Yeah.
old school Hollywood tricks, the best practical effects you've ever seen, and the introduction of CGI in the perfect balance of all three of those, which is, I think, really the way you should be using CGI, is like one of the
Exactly.
many things in your toolkit instead of everything just being CGI, which is another reason why, Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs look the best in the first movie,
Yeah.
because it was a combination of practical effects and CGI
Right.
and not just full
Same
CGI
thing.
dinosaurs.
Exactly. And then you add brilliant cinematography, great score,
I love the score in this
iconic,
movie. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You can hear like two notes of that score and you know exactly what this is.
Hmm.
Um, and then on this rewatch, quite relevant actually with the whole AI stuff. And
Yeah.
I actually like the dialogue writing for once because it's not overly drawn out. The exposition is very contained. Yeah, this thing learns and what have you. It's sort of delving into what we are living in today in a
Right.
very interesting way. So
I mean, it's a perfect movie. Cameron is one of the few directors that has a handful of movies that I would consider perfect in every way, and this is definitely one of them. And we'll talk more later about Arnold in this movie. I think this is also the perfect use of who he is, and
best use of his. It's a
made
great
me fall in love
performance, actually.
with
Yeah.
him. It's an incredible performance, and one of his best, I think, actually, what he's able to pull off a lot more complicated than in Terminator 1, where you just had to look like a steely-eyed killer. And this one, he's doing so many different things and evolves and changes over the course of the film. And it is an incredibly sad moment at the end when he has to kill himself. And
I teared up.
Oh, me too. It's so sad. And John's saying no, and he just gives that awesome like thumbs up as he goes into the. It's just perfect movie. Yeah. Absolutely perfect movie. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.